Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ability Summit. Uh, my name is Derek Kohler. I'm wearing a peak shirt with big dorky glasses. And what our session here today is to be talking about inclusive design and the process related to co-design, specifically focusing on design for people who are neurodivergent. On a more personal note, I have a couple of my own. Specifically, like I have some dyslexia, I have some issues, reading small text that are compressed, which is a very common issue that I seem to have quite sporadically throughout the web. So with that in mind, we'd be able to hopefully be able to take that into account and do the design work into the products that we design. Now, with that in mind, we got a fantastic group of panelists here, and I'd like to have everyone introduce themselves. Provide your name, the organization, and the role within said organization.
Right. Thank you, Derek. I will go first. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for having me today. My name is Heather Tartaglia, and I am EY's Neurodiversity Implementation Leader. And I work directly within EY as well as our amazing clients on their own neuro-inclusion journeys. And I often like to say that I have the best job in the world. And I truly love my job because I feel like I am making a difference and an impact every single day. I also want to take a moment and provide some additional introduction. My pronouns are she and her. I am a woman with long black hair wearing a purplish color shirt and glasses, and I'm sitting in a home office today.
Awesome. Hi there. Super excited to be here and to be chatting about this topic, which I think a lot of people can relate to. My name is Tolu. I'm a product designer at Meta, working on accessibility across our family of apps. And I'm really excited to be talking specifically about product design and neurodiversity. A little bit about myself. I'm based in San Francisco right now, and I am wearing a long black shirt. I have black hair that's just past my collarbone. I have large black glasses, and I am a Black woman of African descent.
Hello, everyone. My name is David Mondello, and I'm a user researcher at Microsoft, specifically within the AI platform experiences team. I've always been interested in the way people incorporate technology into their everyday lives, and I've spent a lot of time exploring the social tensions that AI products can introduce, as well as some of the ways that people can effectively collaborate with emerging technologies. I'm an Italian-American man in his mid-30s, and I'm wearing a white sweater, and my pronouns are he, him.
Hello, my name is Scott Snow. I'm a senior associate with the NCOE within EY. Work on a variety of projects in technology, ranging from automation, web development, data science, and data visualization. And I am a white male. My pronouns are he, him. I'm wearing a gray kind of pullover sweater with a collar.
Fantastic. Welcome, everyone. I'm looking forward to the valuable information we'll be providing here. All right, let's start out with Heather. Can you go into defining neurodiversity and how Ernst & Young sees the benefits of neurodiversity in the workplace?
Absolutely, Derek. I'd be happy to. And I'll start with a bit of definitions. I would like to make sure that we are using the similar definitions and really the foundation of what do we mean by neurodiversity? And I'll start there. So neurodiversity is really an umbrella term that refers to the natural variations in cognitive function. It applies to everyone, whether we are neurodivergent or neurotypical. It's like biodiversity. So it's truly everyone. And while we recognize that these terminologies are ever changing, evolving, neurodivergent is used to describe an individual that has an inherent cognitive variation, hardwired, permanent variation, such as autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyscalculia, often have spiky profiles, and a population that differs in how they socialize, communicate, think, and learn, whereas neurotypicals converge in the way that they communicate, think, perceive, socialize. It is estimated, or has been estimated, that around 15 to 22% of the global population are neurodivergent and have an inherent permanent cognitive difference. What is really interesting is there's been new research as of recent that shows that 53% of the Gen Z population, this is 12 to 27-year-olds, identify as neurodivergent, either somewhat or directly, which is critical now more than ever that we think about the future of work, the employee experience, the colleague experience, customer experience, and our communities as we think about the majority really shifting. And Derek, you asked me, what does neurodiversity, mean to EY? I will share that EY really embraces neurodiversity as a catalyst for creativity, innovation, and ultimately as a business imperative, business success within our firm, within EY, as well as our clients. And I'm so proud, and as I mentioned a little bit earlier, that I often feel like I have the best job, but we launched EY's Neuro-Diverse Centers of Excellence, or what Scott referred to as our NCOE, about 9 years ago. And it was really with the ambition to harness the power of thinking differently. And we all know that diverse teams produce incredible results. And it's really, how do you harness that difference in perspective and difference in thought? And since launching our NCOEs, or again, Neurodiverse Centers of Excellence, EY has leveraged the power and talents of truly neurodiverse teams throughout our business that integrate this cognitive diversity to drive innovation, transformative thinking. We are now 22 cities, 10 countries around the globe, and expanding. And this is in addition to the talent that we know is already embedded into our business everywhere in what we do. And so this 9-year journey has truly been amazing from a colleague experience, our clients, and as I mentioned as well, for our communities. We've seen tremendous value creation, actually over 1 billion with a B in value creation, whether it's innovation, employee pride, sense of belonging, not just for the neurodivergent population, but for all of our employee base, and really creating more inclusive and transformative leaders throughout our organization, which again has been just amazing at creating this ripple effect and is a tremendous value for every single employee. And from an EY standpoint, as I mentioned, diverse teams and cognitive variation and differences are truly critical. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the sense of innovation. Innovation, we know, comes from creativity and truly thinking differently. And so how do you transform organizational culture, changing processes, creating new product? You really need to tap into or not mask or shave off the differences in how we all think, right? Innovation comes from the edges, and you don't want individuals to conform and be like everyone else. You want to allow individuals to have the psychological safety to bring their best self to work every day. And that's where true innovation and creativity and ideas are really born. So the exponential power of neurodiversity and being able to innovate and transform with purpose. And I'd love to pivot, Derek, a bit and talk a little bit about the amazing project that we've been collaborating with Microsoft on, and really bringing the neurodivergent perspectives to improve product design. So we could not be more excited to collaborate with Microsoft to improve the inclusivity, specifically of the Azure AI Studio product for neurodivergent developers. And to no surprise, we really share in the philosophy with Microsoft that diversity is a fuel for innovation, that diversity is really critical. So through this unique collaboration, we really aligned neurodivergent developers from EY in a very focused project where we're able to share feedback and co-design improvements for the new studio to ultimately and hopefully benefit everyone, right? So it's easier to use for everyone. And you'll hear from my fellow panelists in just a bit here as to more details in what we're doing, but we're just thrilled about this project because the approach that we're taking together with Microsoft in this collaboration really aligns to EY's point of view and three core principles we view of inclusive design, and that's really accessibility, usability, co-creation, those three principles. And we think about when you're able to combine these three elements, designs can be meaningful and authentic and useful and really usable to the widest audience and differences that we all have, right? We all know that each and every one of us are different. So that is exactly what we're doing in this project. So I'll take a pause, and I'm excited for you all to hear from my fellow panelists to take a little bit of a deeper dive in what we're doing together with Microsoft.
Thank you, Heather. That was a very informative. Definitely gives us a very good foundation to kind of build upon for understanding why this is so important. With that in mind, let's move over to Tolu. As a product designer, can you go into a little bit more detail about how designing for neurodiversity works?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Heather, for that overview. Heather talked about how neurodiversity is a very common variation of just how different human beings work. And I think there's this tendency for product designers to often think about what we think are the most common kinds of disabilities. We talk a lot about color blindness and blindness and trouble with fine motor skills, but we don't talk about cognitive disabilities or maybe realize how common they are. So we know that over 1 billion people in the world have a disability, but out of all these disabilities, we think that cognitive disabilities are actually the most common, which makes sense because the word cognitive disability is an umbrella term for many different conditions, some of which Heather talked about, like ADHD, dyslexia. So when it comes to designing for these experiences, we need to remember that these are very common experiences, but also there's a likelihood that people who are neurodivergent might have other disabilities as well. So it doesn't look like just designing a singular type of experience. Designing for cognitive disabilities might look different depending on what you're working on. So first of all, when we talk about cognitive disabilities, or disabilities in general that we're designing for across the web, we tend to look at the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines as a place to start to understand what we need to do to make our experiences more accessible. But the guidelines themselves are just that. They're guidelines, they're a jumping off point, and they're a place where we start as designers, but they don't necessarily tell us exactly what we need to do to create great experiences for people with cognitive disabilities. For example, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines tell us to make sure that the language that we use is accessible. But what exactly does accessible language mean? And does that mean something different to different people? So let's talk about a few different aspects that we should probably consider as designers when designing for neurodivergence. So first of all, language. Language is a big one because it can tend to be a little bit ambiguous depending on who you're asking. What to me seems like accessible language might be completely unknown to someone else who's not familiar with what I'm talking about. So a great place to start is just making sure that we are keeping the writing that we're doing, the content that we're writing at a reasonable reading level across the board. So usually we try to maintain a grade 8 reading level or below to make sure as many people as possible understand the content that we are creating. It's really easy to get into this mindset where we are writing for one particular audience and maybe tailor it to that. But we need to realize that across the board, people don't have the same experience when it comes to reading, and reading levels vary widely. Even if someone is capable of reading at a very high reading level, it still makes content much more accessible, easy to understand, and faster to grasp if we keep our reading level more, I guess, equitable across the board. And there are actually apps online that can help you check the reading level of your content. There's one called Hemingway app that I think is a great resource. You kind of just plug in the content and it will tell you what the reading level is. I'm sure there are plenty of other AI tools that do the same thing today. But sometimes there are situations where it's not possible to make the reading level, the reading easier to access. There are fields where I think terminology is just inherently more complex. I think a lot about mortgages when it comes to this. Mortgages, I think, are just inherently difficult to understand. So when I use the term amortization period when it comes to a mortgage, I am going to probably struggle to find a more accessible way to explain that. But if that's not possible, I can instead provide an inline definition or provide a definition or example really nearby that word so that more people are able to understand it and make sure that it's clear what we're referring to. Another thing product designers should be considering is cognitive load. So having a lot of content on a page, having very close together content, not having enough white space are all things that take up cognitive load. And when I talk about cognitive load, I'm thinking about how much working memory or short-term memory someone is using in order to complete a task. So making sure that we consider this will make our products much more accessible to a wider range of people. We want to make sure that we're not forcing users to memorize information. So if we're sending them a code to validate that they are using the right phone number to access our app, let's make sure that we're not forcing people to memorize and carry over that code across different surfaces. Let's make sure that we are giving users reminders and cues to help them with their task. So if I'm filling out a form, instead of just describing what is needed at the very top of the form, I would probably opt to give descriptions alongside fields to remind people what is required information. And I also want to avoid things like infinite scroll, which is a really common one in applications. But when we have infinite scroll, we're kind of forcing people to keep on going, and it's difficult for a subset of users to kind of figure out where they can stop and exit. And also making sure that we're using visuals, graphics, videos, or additional kind of media to support our content is super helpful. I think when we talk about making sure we have accessible images and videos, a lot of people think that means we should avoid those things altogether, but those things can be really helpful resources, especially when people who are neurodivergent might have different ways of understanding experiences. So if we only provide content, people who are maybe our visual learners or derive a lot of value from video might be left out of that experience, but providing multiple ways of supporting our content by providing videos or images alongside content makes it easier for a larger group of people to understand, and it also gives people alternative ways of understanding what our content is really about. A big one is also labeling icons. This is a massive one. I know I have plenty of experiences where I open up an app and it has images that are representing something, but those images don't really mean anything to me. So very easy way to reach as many people as possible is just labeling your icons. It's also helpful to remember that people's understanding of icons differ across cultural context. If I see a shopping cart icon at the top right-hand corner of my webpage, to me it might make sense, but to someone from a country where maybe shopping carts aren't as common, that might be confusing and not very intuitive to them. So just remember that icons, images don't necessarily mean things across cultural contexts. More and more things like floppy disks are maybe not understood even across our own cultural contexts. So having a floppy disk without a label such as save might be confusing to people. So keeping that in mind is super important. And layouts are a big one. So making sure that we provide plenty of white space around our layouts, make it easy for people to parse and skim content is super helpful. I find progressive disclosure, especially in forms or multi-step interactions, is great. And when I say progressive disclosure, I mean making sure that we're separating steps out into logical chunks and not just having people maybe fill out a 60-step form all in one long form. Just kind of breaking that out into related steps is super helpful for helping people use less cognitive load, but making the task easier. And I think the most important thing is testing. So testing with people who have disabilities, testing with people who are neurodivergent in different ways is massively helpful. when you have that diversity, kind of as Heather mentioned earlier, you're able to understand how other people are perceiving your design, and you are able to catch mistakes that you 100% would not catch if you were just testing with yourself or amongst a small group of people. So definitely encourage you to test. And sometimes it's not possible or accessible to have outside outside resources to help you test. But even if you test within your own team or wider teams, there probably are neurodivergent people that you work with. And if you just give them the chance to contribute and give their opinions, you can find a lot of valuable insights. And yeah, making sure that you plan for design for cognitive disabilities is important. This doesn't happen by mistake. It's very much an intentional consideration. So I highly encourage people to think about this, include a wider range of people and people with disabilities in their design process to make sure that we're designing for the widest group of people possible. And just keep in mind that most people who have disabilities experience these disabilities in different ways, and a lot of people with disabilities have multiple disabilities. So designing for cognitive disabilities is also likely to help people who have other disabilities, whether you're kind of aware of them or not. It's always a great practice to keep these things in mind.
Thank you, To. There's a lot of great points you brought up there, because even someone like me who has his own neurodivergent, quirks may not be the same as someone else who may have a different set or even the exact same ones as I do. So it is quite the challenge to try and kind of encompass as much of this as we can to kind of make it so it's available for everyone to use. All right, moving on. David, now we're pass the ball over to Microsoft. How is us as a company this being utilized, and how's our co-design with EY? How does it come into this?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Derek, and thanks both to Heather and Tolu for starting a great discussion around neuro-inclusion in the workforce and in product design. My remarks will add to some of the really great insight you both have already provided. I'd like to start just by talking about some of the resources we have here at Microsoft to help product builders not only recognize the value of inclusive design approach, but also apply this thinking to their areas of focus in ways that are familiar to them. One of the primary resources that we have here at Microsoft is the Inclusive Design Toolkit. It's an incredible collection of work that I'm sure many of the attendees here at the Ability Summit are intimately familiar with. It's not a static document, it's living, and new content bubbles up from ongoing work across different products and services at Microsoft. Just last year, actually, there was an entire section added at this very event around designing for human cognition. So even though my background as a user researcher is focused a lot on eliciting the perspectives that don't always take part in the product development, I was not always well-versed, especially not as well-versed as many of my fellow panelists here, in the amazing diversity of human cognition. So I found the materials in the Design for Cognition workbook to be an incredibly valuable entry point, not only for learning about cognitive demands and the variations that exist, but also how to build those into the work that I do as a user researcher, such as how to draft survey questions or structure an interview to get feedback on topics like decision-making and focus. Again, having access to the toolkit really made it easier for me to start from an informed place when spinning up new inclusive research efforts. One of the first projects where I got to bring these learnings to bear was on the work we're doing with EY to shape a new service my team is building here at Microsoft called Azure AI Studio. This is a new platform that seeks to bring all the various AI capabilities and offerings in Azure, and also from the open source community, into a development space that's optimized for generative AI applications. With the advancements in generative AI, there's a paradigm shift in the way that developers go about their work. Microsoft is certainly at the forefront of some of these innovations, and as a result, developers are looking to Microsoft to help guide them on how best to move forward in this new space. One of the potential shortcomings of this position is that our guidance is based on our own experience developing tools internally. And the world is not made up of Microsoft employees. It's made up of people with much different backgrounds, needs, and experiences who might not think the same way or have similar assumptions. And I think Tolu spoke to this a little bit in the comments before. So this is what doing user research can help reveal. We need to not just design for ourselves, but for the multitude of requirements that are representative of the rich diversity that people have on this planet. So typically, there are a few different points in the product development process where user research happens. Sometimes it happens early on in the process by talking to people and helping to learn about their pain points in a certain domain. So working with retail store managers, for example, about what they know today and what they'd like to know about the way people move through their stores. This can help reveal opportunities and some potential ways to address them. Other times, research might come towards the end of the development process once a product or a prototype already exists. At this stage, engaging with people can help evaluate whether design direction adequately addresses their needs. For example, reviewing the user interface for a language translation app. More rarely, however, the process of user research takes place across several steps of product development and enlists more sustained participation from potential customers to help actively shape a wide range of product decisions, not just a single point-in-time contribution. While this process is more time-intensive, it's also more collaborative. Each step feeds the next, and the continuity of working closely with a dedicated cohort of people brings the people building technology and those who ultimately use it into closer harmony. It's the difference of making a product for a group of people versus making a product with a group of people. And what's more, from a business perspective, such a deeply collaborative process can more systematically identify and address potential barriers to adoption that might exist. So it's just better positioning a product for long-term success in the marketplace. We knew we wanted to take such an approach to the development of Azure AI Studio, but we needed a dedicated partner to work with us. As Heather already mentioned, EY is an Azure customer and has a strong commitment to advancing neuro-inclusion as a catalyst for innovation. With a shared set of values and a vision for how our work together could benefit both our businesses, we decided to work together to leverage the insights of neurodiverse developers through user research and help make Azure AI Studio more accommodating and flexible across a range of cognitive demands. So rather than just consulting with neurodivergent developers at a single point in the product development process, we've set up a series of activities throughout to learn from and build with them. The first activity we're doing is a diary study, and this focuses on having the EY developers gain experience over time using a preview version of Azure AI Studio. So they'll be working with it for a couple of weeks. They then document their experience through structured reflections and develop a firm perspective on the service as it is today. Next, using those reflections, the EY developers will help generate ideas to redesign the current experience alongside Microsoft designers, product managers, and engineers to better meet their needs and address critical pain points. So they'll be working with Microsoft to figure out a path forward together. And then finally, through usability testing, after we've developed these different design improvements, the EY devs will evaluate how well they show up in production mockups and dev builds. We want to make sure that the spirit of the design ideas come through in the finished product. We'll rely on feedback from neurodivergent developers to know whether or not we are successful. So that's one of the ways we're approaching inclusive design for Azure AI Studio. We're leaning heavily into the expertise, experience, and ideas of neurodiverse developers from EY to help us plot a way forward so that the studio works well for a broad range of developers that come to use the service.
Fantastic, David. As a fellow Microsoft employee, I'm glad that not only are we starting early with the AI Studio being a new product, but we're hitting the ground running to fix a lot of these issues, because I'm sure everyone's had the experience of seeing products where it gets ignored for years. So it's fantastic that we're hitting this now and early, so it's not a problem that later on down the road. All right, let's move on to finally, last but not least, Scott, as a fellow engineer, can you kind of give you an idea of what kind of like inspired you to get involved with this project, and what have you learned and or taken from it so far?
Yeah, definitely. So the reason why, I have a few different reasons why I wanted to get involved in this project. Kind of first, I'll start with kind of what David was saying, with the vision for this co-design. I just thought it was like a really innovative approach to, project development that, I haven't really seen before, from software companies. And so I thought it would be, interesting, just from my own perspective, to be involved in this type of collaborative experience. Also, being, neurodivergent as part of the NCOE, I want to help advance neuro-inclusion, and that's, I think that's, we're all here kind of for that as well. And I thought this was a good opportunity to kind of contribute in that space, kind of beyond just the projects that I'm working on in my day-to-day. I've worked on quite a few variety of projects, so with a variety of software tools, and some of them I felt were strong as far as in terms of neuro-inclusion, and I thought they were really easy to use, for a wide array of neurodivergent. They would be easy to use for a wide array of neurodivergent people, whereas I felt some other softwares I use, specifically, kind of in the like database space, I thought it would be a struggle for some neurodivergent people to use. And so that's kind of why, and especially AI is becoming the new thing, and so I thought this was a good opportunity to help a product that I is likely going to be widely used in the coming years be neuro-inclusive. And then also kind of for my own education, like I want to be there as well. So I felt this was a good opportunity to learn, the Azure AI platform and learn about AI. I have a background in data science, so machine learning, natural language processing, things like that. But I have not been able to really immerse myself in that kind of next step of those technologies coming together to make AI. Some of the kind of examples, and what I, like to see, kind of what I mentioned. I felt like database softwares could use more, and I felt like was a software that I've used that I felt was actually pretty solid, as well as some other Microsoft products like Power Automate, where you can kind of have the option to do like a coding approach or like a user interface approach. And that's something that AI Studio they've done pretty well. So far, some of the tasks we've had to do in the diary study, right, is like create a new project, attach it to a new robot. So like we use like ChatGPT and some other robots, as well as we've had another task where we've had to add a data set. And these tasks, getting these done, they actually did flow really well. And so they've done a good job, but there's always, like I'm always kind of trying to keep my lookout for, things that could be improved. And so I've been trying to give my feedback for that. Access of information is kind of one. Sometimes if you're trying to set something up, and you don't have an easy time maybe remembering or writing things down, like you'll have to jump back and forth. There's some situations where like information's easily accessible within the interface, but I feel like there's some other situations where it hasn't been, and so kind of in the feedback I've been giving, that's kind of what I've been trying to help point out. And then also visually, I think we all kind of have, especially people who are neurodivergent, but even people who are neurotypical as well, just different like visual environments where we're most comfortable, like lighting, night mode, text size, things like this. So I've been giving kind of feedback for those as well. So so far it's been like a very good experience with this diary study, and I'm looking forward to kind of wrapping it up this week, and then looking forward to the next step with Microsoft, which will be it's the design sprint, and so that'll be really interesting to kind of see what comes of this feedback that's being provided here in the diary study, and how it's kind of able to help improve Azure AI Studio be more neuro-inclusive.
All right. Thank you, Scott. All right. I think we have just enough time to run one last circuit around. We'll start with you, Heather. Is there any, because there was a lot of information we just kind of just threw at everyone, just expected everyone to understand. Is there any closing thoughts or anything that you want everyone to kind of take away from this session to make sure that it's cemented well into their brain?
Yeah, Derek, absolutely. There was so much great discussion, so much valuable takeaways for the audience today. So Just a fantastic segment with my fellow panelists. A couple of things that are top of mind for takeaways. And when we think about neurodiversity leads to neuro-inclusion. And when you start driving the change in neuro-inclusion, inclusive design processes effectively benefit everyone. And I'd love the audience to take that away. And frankly, inclusive design really improves, it's critical, and it improves outcomes and builds long-term value. As we think, again, going back to my earlier comment around, the employee experience, our colleague experience, and our customer experience. So when products and services ultimately are built accessibly, more people can use them without requiring those adjustments or accommodations. And frankly, that's the goal.
All right, thank you. And how about you, Tolu? Would you like people to take away from your presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think something that I'd like people to remember is that cognitive disabilities can be temporary, they can be situational, and they can be something that people gradually acquire over their life. In all likelihood, you'll probably have a period in your life where you're experiencing brain fog, whether that's because of illness or growing older or just because that's the way you are. And it's helpful to remember that when we keep these things in mind, we're designing both for ourselves and other people, but that it's a natural part of life to have differences in cognition throughout different parts of your life.
Thank you, Tolu. David, how about you?
Well, I've really enjoyed hearing from all the other panelists. I think, Heather, I've really enjoyed hearing what you had to say in general, but specifically, I really loved your point about, how innovation happens at the edges and really embracing differences and what that can lead to in terms of innovation. And in Tolu, I love what you said around designing for different cognitive demands and how you have to go outside of your product team sometimes and figure out, get feedback from people in order to be able to effectively build an accessible product. I think there are two things that I'd say that would love people to take away. One is around, you don't have to start from zero. We have resources here, both at Microsoft and then I think more broadly around how to start doing inclusive design, and specifically with a focus on cognitive demands and cognition. So feel free to use those. The other thing that I would take away is that, this is about product quality. I mean, there's a lot around innovation, but it also just leads to better quality products that are more flexible and accommodating to people. So I think to what Tolu just said, there's different points in your life when you may have different needs. And if you build a product that has those needs baked in, it's going to just work well for everybody, regardless of your situation. So those are two things that I'd love people to take away.
Thank you, David. Scott, any last words?
Yeah, I was just thinking earlier kind of about what Tolu had shared about, designing product for inclusion. And, I think my takeaway for me personally, and then for the audience, would be, never stop trying to think outside of your own box. Even me, I'm in, work with many of my colleagues and myself, we're neurodivergent. And so, we're thinking outside the box, but I think it's easy to get, still kind of locked in to, where you're at. But I still think there could always be one more step like that you can go to think outside the box, and then maybe include, maybe now someone is included that wasn't included before. So. All
right. Thank you, everyone. This was a very riveting amount of information, as I'm sure everyone has experienced. For those of you that like to have more, be able to take their time and read their information, we have a list of, various links and resources to check out that's provided within the PowerPoint that goes along with the presentation. And with that, thank you, everyone, for attending this presentation. I would thank you, and I hope that everyone enjoys the rest of the Ability Summit. Thank you very much.